everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, we are going to look at what's happening in Israel. Um, it's like, oh my gosh, it's a very fluid situation right now. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's been a lot of things going on over the last 24, 48, 78 hours. And, if you're looking for that great final war, not because you're wanting death and destruction, but because you're eager for Christ to come, uh, we may just be there. We may just be beginning to see the beginning of this. I'm going to show you why. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of moving pieces. So, just to kind of start it off, okay, there's this article from First Post quoting the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. This is in other places too, but I just pulled up this article. Israel in greater danger than at any time since the Yom Kippur War, is what he said. Okay, we're going to go into what that means and why that's significant. Let me just show you some of the other headlines of the different things that we're going to be covering. So we got mass protests that are going on. Netanyahu on Sunday fired the defense minister. That's like the equivalent of the Secretary of Defense. There's a big response to that, a really big response. Historic night of protests. Okay. Ex-Israeli Air Force Chief Netanyahu declared civil war, essentially. Israel's largest trade union and major corporation joins forces in historic strike to protest government's judicial overhaul. There was a big protest or big strike that took place, shut down the airport, like the main airport there. Netanyahu. Anyway, we're just gonna get into this, man. There's so much to talk about. So, okay, so how serious is this? If this is the closest that Israel's been to something similar to the Yom Kippur War, what was that? Okay, if you look at Israel's wars, there's kind of three, really, in my mind, that stick out, that were like the most dangerous. The first one was when Israel became a nation. They were immediately attacked and invaded, and they came out on top and they won. That was the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Okay, it was kind of like almost like a war of independence, really. Okay, and then you had the 6-Day War, where again Israel was invaded. It was a war fought between Israel and Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Let's see, it says the nations of Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Algeria, and others also contributed troops and arms to the Arab forces, right? The 6-Day War, I think prophetically was significant because that's where Israel gained possession of Jerusalem and had essentially changed the borders. And then the Yom Kippur War, this is the next one where Egypt and Syria essentially wanted their land back that was won by Israel during the 6-Day War. Okay, and since that time, there's been other clashes, other minor wars. You have these two intifadas, which are basically rebellions, uprisings by the Palestinians. But nothing really like what happened with this last major war, the Yom Kippur War, where major forces, like other Arab countries, invaded Israel. Okay, since that time, October 1973, there really hasn't been anything like that. So, what the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is saying is that this is the closest that we've gotten to this kind of situation where Arab countries would attack Israel. Why? Because right now, the enemies of Israel are probably seeing Israel as being in a period of weakness and divide, and it's just a perfect storm. In fact, there's an article I'm going to cover here that says Israel's divisions are distracting it from a regional perfect storm. So I'm not the only one that's come to this conclusion. Um, there's a lot of things all coming into play together that are making this a perfect storm for, well, that kind of war, potentially, where Israel would be invaded, as well as an intifada, yeah, as well as potentially a civil war. So let's just go through this. I tried my best to put this in kind of like chronological order so that this will all make sense. So I've already done a few videos about this. The new government with um, Benjamin Netanyahu at its head are wanting to make reforms to the judicial branch of the government, the High Court, the equivalent of our Supreme Court. I'm not going to go into all the minutiae because that's not really what this is about. But essentially, the opposition to him and his government view it as him trying to consolidate power, trying to push forward religious and political goals, right? And essentially becoming more and more like a dictatorship, or just consolidating a lot more power um, than what he should have. So this has been going on for a while. There's been all these protests that have essentially been kind of like growing over time, larger and larger. All right. So it got to a point here where the defense minister, and from what I understand, because I watched Amir Tsarfati, right here. This guy, he's a Israeli Christian, and he is a Jew as well. Like, he's a Jewish Christian. He lives there in Israel, and he was saying that essentially the defense minister announced that he was gonna like address the public, and he was gonna have a press conference, and Benjamin Netanyahu didn't know about it. He's like, "Hey, what are you doing there?" And he went forward and he did the press conference, and he called for a halt, or at least like a temporary stop to this judicial reform going forward, because the reason why was because much of, or a sizable portion of Israel's military, specifically the reservists, had joined the nationwide protests and said that they weren't going to show up for duty. And they didn't show up for duty. And so, according to the defense minister, this whole situation was directly affecting national security for Israel. And so that's why he was calling for a stop to this legislation from going forward. Well, guess what happened on Sunday? Netanyahu fired him. So, okay, I don't think I highlighted anything there. Fox News: Israel's Netanyahu fires defense minister over opposition to judicial overhaul, and protests erupt. Like, immediately, once that happened, things just kind of like seemed to go into overdrive. Here's a bunch of pictures of it and videos and whatever. So immediately, um, there's a big response to Netanyahu firing the Minister of Defense. As of right now, according to the Jerusalem Post, his name is Gallant. Gallant still Israel's acting defense minister, who is poised to replace him. So right now, he's still performing that job. And the article discusses later on potential replacements. But at the beginning, it says Yoav Gallant is still the defense minister of Israel as of Tuesday night, despite Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu firing him from the role on Sunday when he publicly opposed the government's push to vote on the judicial overhaul before Passover. Not only that, but he still has not received an official letter of dismissal, but was only told about it verbally, along with Netanyahu's office issuing an informal and non-binding public statement. As of Tuesday night, the Jerusalem Post understands that there was still no clarity between Gallant and Netanyahu as to the future. But as far as what Netanyahu told the nation, in a brief statement, he's fired. Okay, so he was fired. That led to that same night massive protests. This is from Haaretz. Time to flood the streets. How Israel's historic night of pro-democracy protest was born. Net and Haaretz is a very left-leaning uh, company, news organization. Netanyahu's reckless decision to fire his defense minister for speaking out against the judicial overhaul spooked Israelis into action. They texted family and friends, and hundreds of thousands took to the streets. All right, and then what happened? We had this. The ex-Israeli Air Force chief Netanyahu declared civil war. Eitan Ben Eliyahu, a former Israeli Air Force chief, said Netanyahu declared civil war. He cites the prime minister's firing of Gallant and his demand last week that the IDF stop top brass stamp out insubordination that stemmed from concerns over the judicial overhaul. Essentially, what Netanyahu said was like, no, we're not going to tolerate officers and other military personnel. We're not going to tolerate them not showing up for duty. That's insubordination. We're not going to stop and wait and see what they want, hear out their concerns or negotiate with them. That's not going to happen. So, Gallant, you're gone. Everybody get back to work and perform your duty, right? Okay. And then at the same time, along with the massive turnout for the protests, here also Haaretz says, Israel's largest trade union and major corporations joined forces in historic strike to protest government's judicial overhaul. A strike. And this closed down Ben Gurion Airport, which is like the main airport there in the country. And there are many other sectors of society that basically shut down. Now, I spoke to Rabbi Gerfein just a couple hours ago before making this video, and he said that the strike, or at least as far as like the airport goes, that only lasted for like a couple hours. That's according to him. I'm going to read a little bit more here. It says, a general strike of historic proportions was staged by Israel's largest trade union and major corporations to protest the government's judicial overhaul. Ben Gurion, that's the airport, departures halted as Histadrut declares historic strike against overhaul. Union chief says labor action meant to stop the madness after Netanyahu's firing of defense minister, doctors, local authorities, students, and universities also strike. Okay. The head of the Histadrut Labor Federation on Monday declared a historic labor strike in an attempt to stop the madness of the government's controversial judicial overhaul, ramping up demonstrations after Defense Minister Yoav Gallant was fired for speaking out against the planned changes. As part of the labor action, workers at Ben Gurion Airport swiftly announced they would prevent departures. Other organizations also declared they were joining the strike. Quote, we are all worried about Israel's fate, Histadrut chief Arnon Bar David said during a press conference alongside business leaders and public officials. Quote, together we say enough. We have lost our way. This is not about left or right. We can no longer polarize the nation, end quote. The announcement came ahead of an expected statement by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that he is freezing the legislation. The union boss said he had done, quote unquote, everything in the recent weeks to, quote unquote, stop the situation, but the efforts came to naught. Quote, we are all joining hands to shut down the state of Israel. The malls and the factories will close. And I can't really confirm if that strike is still going on or if, like Rabbi Gerfein said, it only lasted a few hours. I haven't seen any news reports saying that it's continuing, but regardless, I watched a news report. What's the name of that channel that I watch? It's like, let's see, it's just this right here, ILTV Israel News. I watched them do a report saying that no, this really was this strike that took place, or that is taking place if it's still going on. It really is historic, to say the least. Nothing like this has ever happened before in Israel. Okay, it's unprecedented. Bar David received a standing ovation at the end of his speech, which was punctured by cheers and chants of democracy. At the meeting of the press conference, participants sang the national anthem. Shortly after Bar David spoke, the workers' union at Ben Gurion Airport was the first to take action, with its head announcing an immediate halt to departures. Quote, I ordered the immediate halt of takeoffs at the airport, Pinchas Eden said in a statement without giving further details. Okay, the Federation of Local Authorities in Israel said it too would join the strike, declared by Histadrut. Oh my gosh, what just happened? Oh, okay, here we go. Quote, the rift in the nation and the tremendous chaos Israel is in have almost reached the point of no return. Modi'in Mayor Haim Bibas, a member of Netanyahu's Likud party who heads the federation, said in a statement. So you have a mayor here. It's almost reached the point of no return. I assume he's referring to a civil war. I don't know. While schools were set to go on Passover break, day camps and kindergartens will not be open on Tuesday morning. Meanwhile, stores, companies, and banks across the country began to close their doors on Monday afternoon as they joined the strike. You see that? Banks, stores, companies, hospitals, and the Israel Electric Corporation said they were operating on a reduced schedule. The popular Terminal X online retail platform closed down operations, saying it was joining the strike and not taking new orders. Tech companies shut their doors, and restaurant chains such as McDonald's and Aroma announced that they too would cease operations. Multiple hotel chains said they would also join the strike, offering very limited services to guests. So that's a lot of stuff shutting down. I really wish I knew right now if they had opened back up. But anyway, on Sunday evening, a group of universities also announced a strike beginning Monday. Here's protesters, right? The mayors and community leaders said they would strike in front of the prime minister's office in Jerusalem. Okay, more of this kind of stuff going on. Let's see, that's it for this article. Yeah, historic proportions is just that again. Is that the same as this over here? Yeah, it's just a double. Okay. So okay, so let's get back up to speed. So the Netanyahu became prime minister after the previous government failed, and the previous government was formed simply to get him out of office, but it failed after just a little while. Netanyahu comes back. They're doing the judicial reforms. Protests begin. They get bigger and bigger and bigger. Gets to the point where the military itself is starting to strike, or at least members of the military. The Secretary of Defense says, hey, we've got to halt this, or at least pause this, because it's starting to affect national security. Then Netanyahu fires him and tells everybody to get back to work, get back to your station if you're in the military. And then and then that made a bunch of protests break out that same night, and it caused this nationwide strike of all these different organizations. And then after that, it says here, Netanyahu announces freeze of judicial reforms. So he was like, okay, let's read what it says here. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered an address to the nation this evening, Monday, on the government's planned judicial reforms. Quote, there is an extreme minority that is ready to tear our country into parts. It tends toward violence. It ignites fires. It threatens to harm elected officials. It talks about civil war, and it calls for insubordination, which is a terrible crime, which of course that's referring to the military. The state of Israel cannot exist without the IDF, and the IDF cannot exist with insubordination. Insubordination by one side will bring about the insubordination on the other side. Insubordination is the end of our state. Therefore, I demand that our security forces and the IDF's commanders to oppose the phenomenon of insubordination. Not to contain it, not to understand it, to stop it. For 3 months, I have called for dialogue. I also said that I would leave no stone unturned in order to reach a solution. Because I remember, we remember that we are not facing enemies, we're facing our brothers. I say here now we must not have a civil war. We're now on a path towards a very dangerous collision in Israeli society, which jeopardizes the basic unity between us. And such a crisis obligates us all of us, to act responsibility. Um, Out of national responsibility, out of the desire to prevent a rift in the nation, I have decided to postpone the third reading of the law in this session of the Knesset in order to give time to try and reach a wide agreement on the legislation in the next session of the Knesset. This way, we will bring about a reform that will restore the balance which has been lost while maintaining and even strengthening human and individual rights, he declared. Okay, so after that strike went into play, he decided, okay, fine, let's go ahead and we're going to freeze this for now. Let's just put this to the side for just a minute and we'll get back to negotiating. Well, that kind of didn't go over too well. Okay, so this is what happened after he froze that. Netanyahu was set to announce the suspension of the judicial reform on Monday morning, but delayed the step after Ben-Gvir threatened to dissolve the government. Okay, Ben-Gvir, he's what I've called before the Dwight Schrute of Israel. He's a radical, to say the least. He's very extreme. Um, so this guy is part of Netanyahu's government, and he's actually over the police in the country. And he is not having it at all when it comes to the protesters. He wants to push forward. He's very, he does not negotiate, essentially. Okay. So anyway, at the same time, it was agreed that the establishment of a national guard under the Ministry of National Security, one of the Likud's, which is the political party Likud coalition, promises to Ben-Gvir, will be approved on the next cabinet meeting. So what that's saying is, okay, so if you're going to stop this, if you're going to put a pause on this, you better give me the National Guard. The National Guard, something that doesn't really exist right now. Okay, we'll get into that in just a minute. Ben-Gvir stated, quote, I agreed to remove the veto for the postponement of the legislation in exchange for a commitment from the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, that the legislation will be brought to the Knesset for approval in the next session if no agreements are reached during the recess. Tens of thousands of people are expected to participate in a right-wing protest outside the Knesset in Jerusalem on Monday evening, with the aim of supporting the government and promoting the judicial reform legislation. So basically, a counter-protest against the protesters. Below, a right-wing crowd chants, quote, "The nation demands judicial reform." So this is opposing the opposers. All right. Here's more about the National Guard. Ben-Gvir's National Guard to focus on Arab-Israeli crime, mixed cities. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir prized. Okay, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's prized new National Guard force, if it happens, will focus on fighting criminal organizations, especially in the Israeli Arab sector, a spokesman said on Tuesday. He added that the new force, which he and Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed to in the coalition agreements and then signed again on Monday night, will be approved by the cabinet next Sunday. So this guy, that's kind of like pretty extreme, very pro-Israel and against, the Palestinians. Not only was he put over the nation's police, which already upset a lot of people, but now he's getting a brand new force that they're calling the National Guard. So that by itself is causing some instability. And this is him right here. This is Ben-Gvir. Okay. He has done what some may call some pretty outrageous things. He went to the Temple Mount, which he knows the last time that like a major government official visited or a political figure visited the Temple Mount, it caused the second Intifada. And I wouldn't be surprised if when he went there in January, he was hoping that a third Intifada would begin. And by the way, they are talking about a third Intifada if you missed my other videos, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit too. Don't worry, we're only partway through this. There's so much more. Okay, nothing else in that one. Israelis protest against Ben Gvir's National Guard on Wednesday. That's today. Okay. Okay. So that was basically part of the deal. It seems like Ben Gvir is getting the new National Guard force. Okay, this is in response basically to Netanyahu putting the freeze on the judicial reform. Now, this is how his side, the side that backs him up, this is how they responded. Religious Zionist Party blasts Netanyahu's plan to freeze judicial reform. They want it to go forward. That he shouldn't have stopped it. Quote, stopping the judicial reform would mean surrendering to violence, anarchy, and the refusal within the army, warns Religious Zionist Party. Here's some of them right here. Oh, this must have been one of the ones that didn't save my highlights. Let me just read a little bit of this. Okay, the Religious Zionist Party pushed back Monday morning on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's decision to pause the judicial overhaul. Netanyahu is slated to make a public address Monday morning, during which he is expected to announce a pause in the legislation of the judicial reform plan. The Prime Minister's coalition allies from the Religious Zionist Party issued a statement rejecting any pause to the judicial overhaul, calling such a move, quote-unquote, surrender to the violent demonstrations by reform opponents. So they're like, if you do this, this is basically giving in to bad behavior. You know, you were voted into office, this government was voted into office, and we're going to do what we want to do legally, and by giving in, you're basically, bowing down to violence and the way that things should not be done. Okay, Israel News latest: protest leader vows action will continue after Netanyahu delays judicial reforms. So even though Netanyahu kind of like handed over an olive branch, so to speak, it seems that the opposition, they're like, no, delaying it isn't doing anything. We want it completely gone. No, we're going to keep going until it's all the way gone. So look what it says here. A protest leader has vowed that action will continue because the overhaul vote would only be delayed. Quote, as long as the legislation continues and is not shelved, we will be on the streets, said Dr. Shikma Bressler, one of the main leaders of the protest movement. Okay, so they are not going to be winding things down. This is from Memo, Middle East Monitor. Palestine-Israel lawmaker uses Arab Spring slogan as Israelis hold anti-government rallies. You remember the Arab Spring? You remember that, right? Of course, some of you do. Arab Spring, Wikipedia. The Arab Spring was a rash of all these different countries that had like uprisings and rebellions, and in some cases civil war, all within about the same period of time. It basically like spread like wildfire throughout all these Muslim and Arab countries. These are the countries that were affected by the Arab Spring. So when this guy is talking about using an Arab Spring slogan, he's talking about slogans that were used in those other countries to topple their own governments and regimes. Okay. Ahmed Tibi, a Palestinian Israeli member of the Israeli Knesset, so he's part of their Congress, the equivalent of Congress, used the famous Arab Spring slogan Monday amid mass anti-government rallies across Israel. Quote, "The people demand the fall of the regime." Could you imagine if somebody in your country or here in the United States, like if they were in the Senate or the House, just Parliament in general, whatever country you're in, and they were using a phrase like that, "The people demand the fall of the regime." I guess sometimes that kind of is used, but this is pretty blatant. And if anything, it doesn't help settle things down and make things calmer. It probably emboldens those that are wanting a third intifada and that are wanting civil war, civil war, and so forth. So that's not good. Um, Times of Israel, Biden not concerned upheaval in Israel will descend into civil war, says official. So that's Biden's take on it. Judicial reform negotiations end after 1 hour and to resume on Wednesday. So after the freezing of the reform, there's plans to have like negotiations, like, let's figure this out. And so that's going on right now. But from what I've read, no one's really no one's really too hopeful about this. Israelis protest judicial reform negotiations, say Netanyahu lied on freeze. So just like we read before, no, they're going to continue to protest, and they're not buying what Netanyahu is selling. Says here, quote, "There's no talking to a lying son of a liar." The Black Flags movement said in a statement. Now, this is the first time that I've heard of that group, the Black Flags movement, and that does not sound good. Uh, frankly, it sounds like, it sounds like this. Put it on here. Be careful. We've talked about this on the channel a number of times. Okay. This is essentially a weapon. From what I can tell and all the research I've done, this is not an organic thing. It doesn't just like come up naturally. It's it's like a new type of warfare where you, an outside force, instigate and supply and finance and facilitate unrest in order to, make changes to a country or topple its government. And I've done a video how basically I think that what's been going on for the last 23 years, or well, more like 22 years, is essentially the war, the final war. It's just that we don't really recognize it because warfare is fought differently nowadays. There still is conventional warfare, but there's more techniques and more things that you can do nowadays. So when I see this, that there's a group inside of Israel called that, uh, and I've heard, I should have pulled this up or researched it, but I've heard that the protests that are going on, they're very well financed. Now, that could just mean from like these companies that are joining the strike and the protest, but I have to wonder if maybe that aid and support is coming from somewhere else other than within the country. Okay. So this right here is very concerning to me because that would mean that there's an outside force that is helping uh, or hoping for the removal of this government and some kind, possibly a revolution. I don't know. Okay, but continuing with this person's statement, there's no negotiation when the law to change the Judicial Selection Committee is ready for a second and third reading. Certainly, there is no legitimacy to the meeting between the opposition and the Avishai Bakshi, a representative of the Kohelet Forum. We're not ready to talk with the destroyers of democracy until the dictatorial legislation is completely abolished. So I don't know how much things are going to calm down, but from what we've read so far, it seems like there's at least a few of these groups that are like, nope, we're going to keep going until this is completely gone. So, in other words, the upheaval is going to continue. Okay, the protests follow the fact that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced on Monday a halt to the highly controversial judicial reform plan to give time for negotiation. However, the bill was still tabled for the Knesset, something the coalition says was just a formality. Okay, nothing else from there. Okay, this is from today. 100,000 rally for reform in Jerusalem. And so here you see it. Da 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 da. Okay. Yesh Atid delegation says they urge Herzog to push for creation of an Israeli constitution. Herzog is the president of Israel. He's not the one that has the power like the prime minister. And what we've read before is that the president of Israel is more of a ceremonial role. But it seems like this one is trying to be more involved in politics. And they've had this meeting where they're like, you know what, maybe we need a constitution, because Israel does not have a constitution. It has a Declaration of Independence, and that's basically the document that their laws are based off of, but they don't actually have a constitution. So it says here, it also says that it expects the legislation currently in progress in the Knesset to be removed from the agenda completely in order to, quote, start talks on a fresh page. So that's from following the first round of talks with President Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president. It's significant to note, I think, also, and he actually brought this up in a different article that we read, that this is going to be the 75th year of the state of Israel since it became a nation. And just because, it's 3/4 of 100, I don't know if that's significant at all, but it kind of stands out to me. All right, moving on. Reservist protest heads. Tens of thousands will refuse to serve. Army is disintegrating. Now, this is from a while ago. I guess we'll have to wait and see if they're able to stomp out the insubordination. But this is concerning when you have headlines like this, that the Israeli army is disintegrating, because that's something that I would want to hear. That would be music to my ears if I was an enemy to Israel. I'd be like, "What? Your military is disintegrating? That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah, let's keep that up." Okay, now let's get into the real implications of this whole thing, what's going on. So look at this. Middle East Eye. Palestinians expect new intifada to erupt, according to polling. New survey by Palestinian Research Center suggests 61% of respondents see a new uprising on the horizon. Okay, this is just from 2 days ago. More than half of Palestinians expect a new intifada to erupt as a result of Israeli military operations in the occupied West Bank, a new survey has revealed. An intifada, again, is a rebellion. It's an uprising. So when we were looking at the list of all these wars and stuff, wars and conflicts, since the Yom Kippur War, there have been 2 intifadas. The most, well, to me, the most famous of which is the Second Intifada. This is the one where, okay, well, the first one happened because in 1987, that was 20 years after the Six-Day War, okay, because that was in 1967. So that's kind of what initiated this. It was like the anniversary of Israel taking those lands, Jerusalem, or when I say Jerusalem, I mean East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and so on. The Second Intifada was started when Ariel Sharon, who was then trying to become the Prime Minister of Israel, he visited the Temple Mount. Everything went okay that day, but it caused like a huge uproar, and so you had the Second Intifada. And now this would be the third Intifada if that's what happens. Nobody really knows. So look at what look at what we're talking about here. First, we were talking about civil war, like actual Israelis fighting Israelis. And I suppose, that's still a possibility. On top of that, you're talking about an intifada or a rebellion by Palestinians. Okay. So potential for civil war, potential for intifada. And then think about Israel's enemies uh, throughout the region. We're going to get to that in a minute. Okay. Let's see. According to a survey carried out by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, 61% of Palestinians expect a new uprising, while 68% support the formation of armed groups, such as the Nablus-based Lion's Den, who did not take orders from the Palestinian Authority. Okay, so that doesn't sound good. All right, here's this one. In order to secure support for judicial overhaul pause, Ben-Gvir gets National Guard under his control. And then at the bottom of this article, it says in early March, 25 former police chiefs and commanders warned Netanyahu that Ben-Gvir's policies could ignite a third Arab Intifada terror wave against Israel. And like I said before, I think he wants that. I'm telling you, this guy right here, I really think that's why he went to the Temple Mount in January. He was hoping to ignite an intifada. He is ready for them to bring it, essentially. That's his attitude. And he says that he's going to go again. And he's a very, very provocative figure. Okay. So more intifada talk. You have this going on right now. A new order in the Middle East. There's a bunch of different articles that you can look into. But well, let me just read what it says. I don't have access to the full article, but Iran and Saudi Arabia's rapprochement could transform the region. And there you see them shaking hands with Xi or whatever from China. On March 6, 2023, representatives from Iran and Saudi Arabia met in Beijing for discussions brokered by China. 4 days later, Riyadh and Tehran announced that they had decided to normalize relations. So there had been a rift between Saudi Arabia. Let's go to the map. Between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Iran has been very, very anti-Israel in developing nuclear weapons. In fact, it seems like they're getting super close. I can't remember, but I think the article is going to remind me that the estimates are 12 days from now they should be able to produce a nuclear weapon. And there's kind of been like a divide between Iran and Saudi Arabia, with Saudi Arabia being more friendly with Israel and the U.S. Well, so they've kind of been on our side, so to speak, but now they're normalizing ties, Iran and Saudi Arabia. That's probably not good if you're living in Israel. You're probably not too happy about that, because that means potentially another country or a block of countries, if others follow, being against Israel and supporting Iran. So that's not good. Let's see. So this landmark agreement has the potential to transform the Middle East by realigning its major powers, replacing the current Arab-Iranian divide with a complex web of relationships and weaving the region into China's global ambitions. For Beijing, the announcement was a great leap forward in its rivalry with Washington. Great. Okay, now this last article. Financial Times, Israel's divisions are distracting it from regional perfect storm. So just think about it this way. Let's pretend that you're the leader of Iran. You see Israel having all sorts of social and political strife right now. They're very distracted. They're talking about civil war. No matter how serious or not serious, they're still talking about it. You know that Hamas and Palestinians are thinking about a third intifada, right? At the same time, up here in Russia, Europe and the United States, in other Western countries, are kind of focused on Russia. They're focused on Russia. Uh, I think it was, what was it? Was it Finland and Sweden? Let's see. Two new members of NATO. I don't know how I forgot this. Yeah, the ratification process for Sweden and Finland began on the 5th of July 2022. As of the 15th of October 2022, all NATO members except, okay, wait. Okay, well, here you go. August 3rd, 2022. NATO has two new members, Finland and Sweden. So that was prompted by Russia invading Ukraine. Here's Finland up here in Sweden. Um, so Europe in the United States and the West in general are kind of focusing on Russia. They're giving a lot of aid to Ukraine. They're sending equipment and supplies to Ukraine. Russia has threatened nuclear action against the United Kingdom by causing nuclear tsunamis using a new technique, I guess, where you have like a nuclear submarine that shoots like a torpedo, and then it explodes underwater, resulting in a tsunami that wipes out coastal towns. Although they did show an animation where the entire island is submerged by water. I don't know how likely that is, but anyway, so the West hands are kind of tied over here. So if you're Iran, wouldn't you think that this is kind of a perfect storm? When was the last time, if you're Iran, when's the last time that things were so perfect? When was the last time? And can you count on things turning to your favor like this again in the future? How long are you going to have to wait? So, the way that I see it is that those that want to do Israel harm, they have kind of a small window of opportunity. Maybe larger than small, I don't know. But in fact, it's like right now. Why not do it right now? Now, I'm not like an expert. I don't know. Maybe there's a lot of things I don't understand, but I would imagine that they're definitely thinking about it, and it seems like this report um, thinks that as well. Let's read some of it. Okay, unfortunately, it's likely to be a temporary reprieve, talking about the pause to the judicial reform. The two sides are very far apart. The government seeks control over the court to advance its far right and religious objectives. The opposition seeks to protect the court's independence to thwart the government. Both sides are full of righteous indignation. The government believes that it won the right via the ballot box to pursue its agenda. Each coalition member has its own vital stake in the judicial restructuring. The religious Zionists want to prevent the court from protecting Palestinian land rights in the West Bank. The Orthodox religious parties want to prevent the court from sending yeshiva students to the army. For some reason, if you're Orthodox in Israel, you don't have to join the army. And furthermore, the government subsidizes men that go to study at yeshiva. That's where you learn Torah and Talmud and stuff like that. So they get like a government stipend. So they want to like protect their interests, by controlling the court. And then Netanyahu wants to stop it from sending him to jail. Yeah, and that's weird because he was having legal trouble before he became prime minister. So I guess that's still underway. I don't know. So you have these three groups that have these three objectives, and that's why they have an interest in changing things with the court. Okay, with only a month before the Knesset comes back into session, there's not enough time for reconciliation, especially if both sides feel they have more to gain by refusing to compromise. They're likely to engage in a game of maneuver to ensure that when the clock stops, the other side is blamed. So it doesn't seem like there's really any good solution. Okay, which means I would imagine that means that this strife and protests and stuff like that is probably going to just continue for the foreseeable future. That's not good for Israel. Okay, so preoccupied by all this, Israel's policymakers have little bandwidth to deal with the external crises that threaten to create a perfect storm. They're distracted by what's happening inside the country. In the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the situation has been deteriorating as friction between Palestinian and Israeli settler militants and the Israeli Defense Forces generates a mounting casualty roll. Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff going on with settlers and Palestinians. Several factors are fueling the potential for an explosion. The Palestinian Authority is crumbling. Young militants with ready access to weapons are attacking Israelis, not deterred by the memory of the last Intifada, because they weren't alive. So it's like a whole new game now when they were infants. Settlers are responding with violence. Being careful with how I say all this. So there's big strife. I'm just gonna okay. And the onset of Ramadan and Passover, when emotions run high, makes friction at Jerusalem's holy sites seemingly inevitable. Yeah, so that's another part of the perfect storm, the overlap of Ramadan and Passover this year. And it says here, the last thing Netanyahu needs now is an explosion of violence. Yeah, that's why it's like if you're an enemy, I feel like it's a really good time to take advantage of that. If it's bad for him, then that must mean that it's good for his enemies. I feel like that's what logic dictates. Iran continues its march toward the nuclear threshold, with U.S. officials recently testifying that it would only need 12 days to enrich enough uranium weapons grade uh, to weapons grade for a nuclear bomb. Again, I've been very confused in the past because I feel like they said so many times, oh, they're just months away from a nuclear bomb. But whatever, this is what they're saying now. 12 days to enrich enough uranium for weapons grade for a nuclear bomb. Iran's regime has survived the women's uprising, at least for the time being, and forged strategic alliances with Russia and China. While its communities, while its my gosh, while its economy remains in trouble, it is now set to receive advanced Russian weapons and technology, a reward for the help it is providing to Vladimir Putin for his war in Ukraine. So you may remember, in fact, let's look at the Institute for the Study of War. Let's see if they have something right now about Iran. They do. What are we looking at here? Oh, this isn't, I don't think this has to do with the protests. There's been what I believe, and I could be wrong, but what I believe is this being levied against Iran and the country of Georgia. Okay, there's been like these massive protests in Iran. Let me just see if there's like a map. Because these guys were following that. So it looks like that's probably just like the article suggests. It seems like maybe that's kind of come to a close or a slowdown. Anyway, they were dealing with that situation. Okay, so they survived that, at least for now. Okay, until now, the Iranians have been deterred from crossing the nuclear threshold by fear of Israeli preemption or American retaliation. Okay, so is that why? Is it that, like, you say, let's say you go back a year or two and they're like, oh, Iran's only 2 months away from a nuclear bomb. Did they just like kind of stop because they knew that there would be retaliation? And so that's why that's kind of been on pause. I don't understand. If you understand that, put it in the comments below. So anyway, up until this point, they knew that the US and Israel would respond. But Iran knows that the US is preoccupied elsewhere and uninterested in a new Middle Eastern war. Yeah, they're preoccupied with Russia and China. With Russia and China, Iran could well conclude from Israel's internal crisis that it no longer needs to fear its military action either. Yeah, because now in Israel, you have people not showing up for duty and talk about civil war. This is perfect for Iran. And can they afford to not take advantage of it? That's the question. Because I ask you, when is there going to be another time in the future that will be as prime as it is right now? That's what's so dangerous about this right now. Okay, all this is alarming to President Joe Biden's administration, which depends on Israel, fortified by decades of generous U.S. military assistance, to help maintain stability in a volatile region. Not only is that role being eroded by the internal divisions, but the crisis over judicial restructuring, as well as the Netanyahu government's ambitious plans for settlement activity, is creating friction with Washington. With the stakes so high, Israel's friends are left to hope that Herzog, that's the president, hope that the president's mediation can succeed. Only its enemies will relish the failure. And it doesn't sound like it's going to succeed. You guys, I kid you not, this really might be the closest that we've been to the final war. You know, it's been a long time since the Yom Kippur War, relatively speaking. Again, that was back in 1973. A lot of things have happened since then. You know, Israel has generally done well during that time, with the exception of just like smaller conflicts, stuff happening within its own territory in some cases. But now, with the whole world losing its mind, this may just be the time for action if you're Iran, or if you're a Palestinian. I'm obviously not calling for that. I hope everyone realizes that. No, I'm not trying to make light of the situation either. Um, but sometimes you have to laugh a little bit to ease tension. Remember the Yom Kippur War in the 70s. It was a surprise attack. It was a joint action between Syria and Egypt, and they decided to attack on the holiest Jewish day of the year, Yom Kippur. And the Israeli military wasn't expecting it. They were caught off guard, but they still won. So, just as a recap, in the U.S., we have a weak president that's not, he's not hawkish. He's more on the weak side. Uh, and I think there's no doubt, right? If Trump or somebody else was in office, then I doubt that Iran would feel so emboldened, you know, or the enemies of Israel. But we have kind of a weak U.S. president. We have Russia that's concerning the rest of Europe and the United States. You have China that's also preoccupying the United States. You have uh, a call for a third intifada, and you have a new generation that weren't around for the last one that are anxious and waiting for their turn. And you have Israel that's, really divided right now and talking about a civil war. And there's people not showing up for duty in the military. That's a lot of stuff to go wrong if you're Israel, or a lot of stuff to go right if you're an enemy of Israel. And it's all happening at this time, looking at the even bigger picture. If we're thinking about beyond just politics and Israel, everything that's been going on in the church within the last few years, especially between last conference and this conference, all the signs in the heaven, all these people, all these like leaders that are dying, the Queen, the longest living Soviet president, the longest living Chinese president, and the longest living Pope, the longest living nun, like all that stuff. That's happening right now. And the symbol of that, I think, is pretty unmistakable. The symbol is that worldly nations are coming to an end because the second coming is going to be here soon. And he's going to make a full end of nations. That's happening right now as Israel is going through this, what we just went through in this video. Jeez Louise, I don't know. Like I always say, all we can do is just wait and see what happens. But something tells me that the next month or two are going to be interesting, to say the least. All right, well, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.